Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our NFU Energy's webinar this afternoon on the Renewable Heat Incentive, so ways to optimise, comply and generate and get your questions answered. So I'm Gemma, I'm Gemma Bauer, Head of Marketing at NFU Energy. I will be chairing the session this afternoon, so I will take any questions at the end. And I'd like to introduce my colleague Thomas Wilkins. So Thomas is our Head of Technical Delivery, who will be delivering today's webinar. So this webinar is being recorded. We will be uploading it to YouTube after the session. So for those of you that registered and weren't able to join, can watch it back later. So all microphones will be muted. So as I mentioned, we will be taking questions at the end of this webinar. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature that you'll see on the Teams window. So if you just write your question in there, I will then come to answer them at the end of the webinar. And if you have questions in there that we didn't get a chance to get to, we will answer your question afterwards and make sure your questions get answered. Okay, so without further ado, I will pass over to Thomas. Thank you, Thomas.
Gemma. Thank you. So yes, this is the webinar on the Renewable Heat Incentive. Just a quick about the NFU Energy. So we are an energy consultancy designed to help promote the sustainable energy solutions to evolve agriculture and across public and private sector. Our vision is to be the go-to provider of the best zero carbon energy solutions for agriculture, horticulture and other related businesses. What we do, so we've got a brokerage service that broker electricity, gas and water, and so that's within our contracts team. We also offer energy efficiency audits and feasibilities and seeing ever more increasing carbon accounting requirements. Compliance, which is part of what we're talking about today, so the Renewable Heat Incentive, but we also assist with things like Combined Heat and Power, Quality Assurance Scheme, Medium Combustion Plant Directive, which quite often have a link into the RHI and the required to remain compliant on that. And we also offer a resolution to help you generate your own renewable technologies. Just a little bit more on the RHI side. So I mean, I've been involved with NFU Energy for the last 10 years. We, as NFU Energy, submitted application number 2, so I've got RHI number 0002. So we've been involved with the RHI from the beginning. I'm also a member of the REA Wood Heat Forum, and so the purpose of that is to promote promote biomass boilers, but also it's looking at challenging government and RHI services pop quite often as making sure that you stay compliant and the requirements to do that. Brief background then really on what the Renewable Heat Incentive is. So it's set up to encourage the generation of renewable heat. It was a 20-year scheme. It started in November 2011. That's when the first applications you could submit, and it went through up until March 2021 for normal applications, and extension applications and tariff guarantees got an extra 2 years. However, the final payments for them will be up till March 2041. So if you had the extension and you used all the way up until March 23, you actually only end up with an 18-year scheme rather than a 20-year scheme. The eligible uses, say space heating, so we see a lot of workshops, could be domestic properties, as long as there's multiple of those. Anything essentially that is considered a wholly enclosed building, you are allowed to heat within the RHI scheme. Water heating has to be done indoors, but again, anything that you require water heating for is perfectly eligible. Process heating, so as long as there is a commercial reason to do that, then process heating can be done. So we've seen things such as steam forming. You've seen other ones such as using it in the creameries and things, steam in the creameries or anything on that. So process heating, it can be done inside. And then anything that's outside in terms of process heating, it can only be for cleaning or drying. Now, the only exceptions to that is the rules did change in 2018. So you are no longer allowed. So if you got on before then you can still continue to do it. But any new applications or any amendments to the system, wood drying, waste drying, and digestate drying are all deemed as ineligible. So they're the three things that you can no longer do if you wanted to add them to your system. But everything else is still eligible on the scheme. The technologies that are covered, so there are 22,368 applications that were made on the scheme, and as you can see, the majority of those were biomass boilers. This is the scheme started really on the back of biomass boilers being the number one. Any boilers that are less than 200 kilowatts, that's what the scheme started on. And then as tariff changed and the market changed, we started to see a few more heat pumps being brought in, biogas plant, biomethane. And again, this is number of applications. So biomethane plants are considerably bigger than what we see as solid biomass. So there are fewer of those, but they still make up a proportion of the applications that went in. So I've got a few different technologies there, sort of dotted around in the pictures of all ones that sort of NFU Energy have been involved with. Interestingly, this is then applications through time. So this takes us up till March 2023, and we can see that the peak number of applications was in 2016. And the reason why sort of 2016 was the year is this is the year where we started to see the 200 kilowatts, less than 200 kilowatt biomass boiler digressions really start to take shape. So the government set a benchmark. They decided that this is how many they were going to allow to be on the scheme, and then they were going to start to do digressions. So the first of all started with 5%, then 10%, then 20% over different quarters. So it did enable the market to sort of move with that, understand what was going to happen, know what was set out in front of them. The tariffs were going to change, and we started to say when the 200 kilowatt biomass boilers started to sort of disappear off, then we started to see bigger boilers getting installed. So tariff digressions were really the driver as to why 2016 was really the peak of the RHI applications. As mentioned, the change in technology, so it was technology type, so we went from biomass into heat pumps, which were much bigger installs. As mentioned, AD plants as well. So again, we're talking much bigger installs. So there are much fewer of those. They're still taking a reasonable amount of tariff from the RHI scheme, but there's fewer of the installations. And we moved from those smaller to the larger. So again, towards the end of the scheme in the biomass sector, we were seeing 4, 5, 6 megawatt boilers being installed, whereas early on, really, it was only the sort of less than 200 kilowatt boilers being installed. And the final reason is around changing regulations. So what people are allowed to do with the heat, as I mentioned, the ones that were taken off in 2018 for the drying of your waste, your wood, and your digestate. So that changed what people could do. So there are really that changing regulations meant that people would sort of change the way that they were going with their generator. So we've got this webinar going on, and if it's finished, why are we still talking about it? Well, the main thing really is that it's a 20-year scheme, so the last people are going to receive their payments up until March 2041. So you've got to remain compliant throughout. There is a whole list of ongoing obligations that you've got to remain compliant with, and so really part of this is to talk about what it is that we need to make sure that we're doing to enable us to continue to receive the RHI payment for the 20 years of our scheme. The other part of this is around showing the mechanism that's in place to allow actually new participants to be on the scheme. So there are no new applications in terms of getting an allocation for that, but you can buy already accredited schemes that are out there and put that onto yours. So again, I'll go into a bit more detail of those as to what that looks like and how that can be done. So first of all, in terms of what can we do to help? What are we seeing for existing participants on the RHI scheme? So the majority of what we're working on at the moment is around amendments, heating system changes. So we could be talking changing the heat uses, adding new uses, removing uses. All of these need to be noted to Ofgem within 28 days of these changes happening. Again, insulation, you change your insulation, you move the pipes around the system. If you want to add additional generation, so a backup boiler, or want to remove a backup boiler, all these things, anything that changes on your heating system, you need to notify Ofgem, and that's something that we can assist with in terms of sort of helping you get that application done. The other major thing that's essentially has started now and is around this heat meter replacement. So the RHI regulations state that you need to get your heat meter recalibrated every 10 years. As mentioned at the start, the scheme started in November 2011. So really, we're starting that ball rolling in terms of people are getting to their 10 years. And as the peak year was 2016 and 2015 wasn't that far behind it, we're going to start to see these 10-year meter recalibrations really coming into force. Majority of the market are just replacing them. That seems to be the where most people sort of say, if you go for recalibration, it's removal of the meter, and it's waiting for the time for that to be done and sent away and recalibrated. So majority of the market is just replacing their meters with brand new meters. And where there's a replacement of a heat meter, there's a notification of Ofgem and it's an amendment. And again, that all needs to be done within the 28 days that Ofgem specified to be done. Again, with your ongoing ones, periodic data submissions. So to claim your money, you have to do your periodic data submissions, and alongside that, there's sustainability. So there's greenhouse gas calculations, or proving the sustainability with your BSL, your biomass suppliers list, or your SFR number. And so it's all about collating that, and that's something that we can help with, help you ensure that your periodic data submissions are correct and that Ofgem are paying you correctly. Again, it's something that we do with all our periodic data customers, is making sure that they're being paid correctly. The other one to mention is around replacement plant. So in the changes in 2018, where they removed the being able to drive wood, one of the things that they brought in was actually you are able to replace your plant. Now, the key things with this is it has to be the same technology. So again, if we're talking biomass boiler, it doesn't matter the size. But the importance is it's the same technology. So you could replace a 200 kilowatt biomass boiler with a 400 kilowatt biomass boiler, and that's still perfectly acceptable. There are mechanisms in place to make sure you don't benefit more than you could possibly on the last one. So your tier one would still stay the same, and your tier one would still stay the same as what it was for the 200 kilowatt, and you would have a maximum generation for that year. So you wouldn't be able to generate more than 8,760 hours in the year times 200, but you are able to change the capacity. So that's going smaller or larger, which if you need that to benefit your site, then you're able to do that. And you can say it continues the same tariff and the same remainder time of the year, remainder time on the RHI scheme. So that was a good change that enabled people that did have broken down boilers or boilers that weren't operating as well as they wanted to, enable them to be able to change their systems. RHI audit. So again, this is one of the things that we're seeing lots of people are having at the moment. You are expected to have 2 audits within the 20 years of your RHI scheme. Some people will probably end up with more, and others will end up with less. But on average, sort of 2 years is what we're seeing. Now, we offer a health check service. The idea behind that is to make sure that you are audit ready. And we look at 3 main areas really when we're coming to site and doing this health check service. We're looking at your records, so meter records, making sure they're up to date, making sure that they're taken regularly, that there's some elements of photographs. If Ofgem ever question them, you've got some sort of proof of that, and you've got a place where it's all being recorded. There's the fuel, and we can get in terms of recording your fuel, there's lots of different elements to that. There's the quantity, there's how much you've used per quarter. So if you're filling a fuel store and you're using invoices, for instance, how much is left in your fuel store. So it's all about having that data and being able to, if Ofgem said how much you've used in this quarter, you're able to determine that. There's the maintenance. So in 2022, there was brought in this requirement to have your boiler HETAS, have annual maintenance for a HETAS engineer. And so that maintenance was always a requirement. It always said within the regulations you should do it, but there was never any standard that anyone needed to do it to. And so they brought in this new standard for the HETAS. And so again, that's something that for biomass boilers, you need to do it every year. And then use records is something that, again, we're seeing on audits that they're requesting generally when we're talking about drying, but they'll still want to see, so if you're heating a poultry shed, they'll want to see some sort of records that you're selling poultry, selling birds or eggs or whatever it is. If you're heating glass houses, they'll want to see some sort of evidence that you are heating a crop and you have heat. And say most often what we tend to see is one invoice per quarter that you've been eligible on the scheme. So there'll be a few invoices they want to see. It's just proving that you've got a commercial basis on the back of it. The next section that we tend to look at is sustainability. So if you've got an FMS, so the fuel management sampling questionnaire, this lists how you're recording your fuel. This lists what the fuel is that you're allowed to burn, and greenhouse gas calculations that are associated with them. It's then have you got the calculations, where do they sit? Are they on a spreadsheet that can be freely available that Ofgem can see? And so the sustainability side is very simple when you've got things like BSL, biomass suppliers list, or SFR number. Those are ones that you can retain and you hold, and that's your proof that you're sustainable. But when you're outside of that scope, there's an FMS, there's greenhouse gas calculations, and so we see that more with AD plants, but again, that also happens with biomass boilers. And then there's the land criteria, so it's ensuring that your land is in agricultural production in 2008, and that's what your benchmark is. And so it's making sure that the land hasn't changed use. And so it's majority of people tend to go down the route of single farm payments or the rural payment scheme, using that as the evidence. But we can offer, if you haven't got that information, it's satellite data can be used, so we can put reports together that shows that the land was in agricultural production in 2018. The final sort of third bit that we really look at is around the physical installation. So it's making sure that the meter was installed correctly, that it's not directly upwards, not directly downwards, it's on its side as it should be listed on the installation instructions, that it's in the right place, that there hasn't been any damage and causing problems with temperature sensors. Make sure that the plant hasn't changed. We're checking serial numbers of the heat meter. Any external pipe work that is what was said on the application, so we're comparing it to the application and the schematic, and that all the uses have been declared. So we quite often see when we're doing these health checks that just another building has been added because they say it's not the person that's been managing the RHI that's really looked at it. Someone's tapped off and they've got another building added, and so clearly that would require amendment. And so our job of the health check is to sort of inform where we're at, making sure that we can get up to speed, so that we can, as mentioned earlier, be audit ready for when Ofgem sort of want to come and see your installation. We can also offer, so that generally is done before audits. We can also offer audit support, so we can be there on the day of the audit. We can also then help resolve any non-compliances as of an audit. So if the audit's gone ahead and then all of a sudden there's non-compliances, it's say we can help resolve those, understand what it is that's being asked, and sort of help you get to a point where you can actually get those resolved. So that's where we are in audits and the service that we offer. And please, you can scan that QR code. That will take you to take you to a place where you can order a health check from us. And we're seeing more and more of these being requested, and it's all about just trying to make sure that you're prepared and you're ready for audit. I suppose the one thing that's worth mentioning just because of the way the scheme worked, they brought in the requirement for you to actually show your planning permission and environmental permits. You've always been required to have them within the regulation. It's always said there, but as part of the applications, I believe it was 2018 again that they brought in, you actually had to submit your planning applications. Now, if you have an audit, that's one of the things they're going to ask to see. They're going to see that you have the sufficient planning in place, and they're not the experts. They don't know what whether or not it's exempt and all that sort of thing. So it's your local authority that have the say. So you need either a letter from your local authority that says this is exempt, we don't need planning because of this, or you'll have some planning permission to prove it. So that's one of the first questions that we see are asked when an audit's happening. So I've broken this next bit down about around sort of what we can offer for existing participants, and then the next one will be for new participants. So as mentioned earlier, the RHI amendments are the main thing that we're doing. we're seeing a lot of those changing. I say it's just as businesses change, it's going to have a change to the system. We're included in here things like even change of fuel. So if you've been on virgin fuel and virgin biomass, for instance, and you want to do straw, providing your boiler can do that, then we can make applications to change your fuel. But as well as that, there's the physical changes on your heating system, adding new stuff, changing stuff, all of that needs to be notified to Ofgem. The heat meter changes, again, mentioned that, and say we are starting to see more and more of those happening. We get to see what happens if you're outside the 10-year window. Often we're asking questions from the participant about when you knew you had to do it, when you applied for the meter, when you had a quote for it, and all that sort of thing. But again, it's one of those that we just need to be on top of, this 10-year meter requirement, and it's from the point that your application went in. And so Ofgem are starting to ask that, starting to look at that, and clearly as we start to get closer and closer to the 2015 and 2016, 2025 and 2026, we're going to see sort of 10,000 applications in that time. So often we're really looking into that, and so just being aware of when your audits, your heat meters need to be amended. Replacement plant applications. So this is something that we're seeing happen when people are moving. So they've had either some catastrophic failure and having to replace them, or where people are changing the type. So technology has to stay the same, but we're seeing biomass boilers, for instance, you've gone from a batch burning boiler to an automatic boiler, or the other way around, because depending on if you've had lots of problems, batch burning boiler is very but hands-on. You have to load the boiler every time, whereas an automatic boiler, again, you fill a fuel store. And so with people that have had a bit more experience with what the RHI is, we're seeing people actually being able to go, well, I know what the income is, I know what the RHI looks like, I can actually go and either spend a bit more, or I've had loads of problems with an automatic boiler, I want to go for something much simpler, a batch burning boiler. So that sits within the same technology of biomass. But as mentioned earlier, again, we're seeing the small people changing boiler sizes. Perhaps they went for a bigger boiler with the idea of expansion, and actually that expansion hasn't happened, and they've got a really big boiler and haven't got as much of use as they wanted. So you can absolutely go smaller. Your RHI tier 1 does shrink to the new capacity, so that's just something to bear in mind. But yeah, absolutely we can do that. Or as I said earlier, the other way is where we're seeing people install bigger boilers. So they installed a 199 boiler because that's, again, partly around the tariff, but also what they wanted. And now actually you can install that up to a 400, 500, whatever size boiler you want to go. Your tier 1 stays the same, but it just means that you've actually got more heat generation and more availability to get all the RHI, so your tier 1 and all your tier 2 if you wanted to, if you have a requirement for that heat. Periodic emissions, again, say something that we're doing all the time. Do say a lot more within the AD because there's a lot more involved in the greenhouse gas calculations, but absolutely we do with the biomass emissions. And say one of the main things is around checking what the data is going in, make sure that it all makes sense, that there's no overgeneration and generation heat meters that have failed potentially, and it's identifying those early, or it's checking the amount of money that Ofgem are paying, and ensuring that that's what we're expecting. For new participants, so as mentioned earlier, you can buy an already accredited system and change the ownership of it. What we tend to find is that, say, we've got these 3 mechanisms. We've got the change of ownership, we've got a replacement plant, and relocation. And these tend to, if someone new is coming onto the scheme, they tend to go for all 3 at the same time. So it's essentially buying an accreditation and putting it onto a new boiler on a new site with a new owner. All of these are within the rules. All these are perfectly legitimate to and can all happen at the same time. Change of ownership, just some things that to bear in mind is that is make sure you've had your due diligence done. We're seeing a few accreditations that have either got audits or got other things that sort of holding them back, which means they can't transfer straight away. And so having due diligence, checking that can be transferred across when we want it to be transferred is absolutely vital to be doing that. So we'd always recommend having some due diligence done, and that's something that we can help with. Replacement plant, I think we talked already, but it's once you've change your ownership, you can then replace it. Again, have a brand new boiler, and that's certainly not a problem. And then there's relocation, which is moving it from one site to another. When we do a change of ownership, that's a relatively straightforward process. Yes, Ofgem take their time occasionally, but we expect a change of ownership to happen within sort of 2 to 6 months. Replacement plant and relocation applications are full new applications, so whilst they will still retain the RHI from the previous application, you have to go ahead and submit a brand new application. So replacement plant, sometimes it's thought that I'm just changing the boiler so everything stays the same, but you have to go through the whole application process. And the same with the relocation. Even if you haven't changed the boiler and you've kept the same boiler, they then need to judge the eligibility of it on the new location. So those two take considerably longer, but we can do all three of those at the same time for new participants to get on the scheme. The other things that's worth mentioning, so additional service that aren't exactly RHI but are very much related. So Woodshaw came into effect from April 2022, and this is essentially fuel quality. So this is all about proving that your fuel is of the quality that your emission certificate covered. It's only for virgin wood. So, and again, we're talking biomass boilers here, but it's only for virgin wood. But it's when you've got an RHI application and you've got your emission certificate, it will state what sizes, what the moisture content is, what the fines, and what's allowed to be burnt. And the Woodshaw side of it is all about making sure that it fits within those regulations, that there's no places that any contamination could get into the system, that your chips are the right size, because it's about emissions control is what they're aiming for. The biomass suppliers list. On the Woodshaw side, we assist with applications. It's sort of getting that. There's a simple application, which is if you're not selling anything, and there's a more complex one if you are selling it. But again, we can assist with those, and it's making sure that you remain compliant. Biomass suppliers list, again, we help with the applications, but this is then about fuel sustainability. So we've got fuel quality and fuel sustainability. Fuel sustainability is essentially where you've got the wood from. Does it have FSC? Is it FSC wood, for instance? What's your proof that you're allowed to legally fell that wood and use it within your boiler? So that's where your sustainability comes from. They clearly the extremes is they don't want you to be chopping down the rainforest to be to bring it over here and burning it, but it also has things like peat bogs. We just need to make sure that we are legally allowed to fell that timber and burn it within in our boilers. And that's basically it for the app, what we can do, what we can offer, what the RHI looks like as a whole. And if you've got any questions, please fire away. But I think Gemma's back.
Thank you very much, Thomas. No, that was great. We have had a couple of questions come in. So the first one is, are you aware of any company or service conducting on-site or off-site meter recalibrations?
So at the moment, and again, this is why I mentioned earlier around sort of the REA have put to Ofgem whether or not on-site recalibration is acceptable. Ofgem are actually, the government side of it are going away and determining whether or not that is acceptable. As it stands at the moment, the recalibration needs to be to the same MID standard, and which is essentially being put on a test bed. And so right now there's no test beds that are sort of that are mobile. Yes, there are companies that do recalibration that you send away. I believe there's one within the UK, but the majority of the ones are being sent back to the manufacturer that made the meter in the first place. So Sontex and Camstrup, they're going back to the manufacturer and they're doing it. But yeah, I believe there is one place within the UK that does recalibration.
Thank you, Thomas. So next question is, so for 10-year meter replacements, is this the 10 years from the date of application submission, or date of acceptance onto the scheme, or date on the heat meter?
So this is a common question we get all the time. There actually hasn't been any clarity. However, the industry is taking that it is the date of the application, so 10 years. Again, it's part of the intent of the scheme is 10 years halfway through the scheme that you should have your heat meters recalibrated. So that then fits very much with the date your application went in as to when your 10 years is. So that is what the industry is taking, unless we get any further black and white that says it's this or this from Ofgem, which again we are asking for. We're looking for a bit more clarity of, but the industry is using the date of application is when the 10 years is up.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. That's all the questions we've had. I will give a minute or so in case anybody else has any other questions. Feel free to put them into the Q&A or the chat feature, and I can get them put forward. But if not, please feel free to drop us an email at sales@nfuenergy.co.uk, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have on the RHI scheme or any other services that we offer. Okay, I don't think there's any further questions, so we'll leave it there for. Oh, bear with me. There is. So there seems to be an availability of chip from ash dieback tree felling from Tree Surgeons Forestry that don't have BSL accreditation. Is there a way of making this legal to use when it is available locally?
So again, I mean, we're talking two slightly different things here, because one's around the essentially permitting wise as to whether or not we're allowed to do the permitting side. For RHI purposes, if it falls within your emission certificate fuel, then the answer is absolutely yes. If you're not on an emission certificate and you're on a permit, again, as long as it falls within your permitting framework, then absolutely. But in terms of the actual legality of being able to burn it, that's an environmental permit question rather than RHI. But if it falls within your emission certificate standards, if you're most of these are to 17225, the British standard 17225, and it falls within that, then within RHI purposes, yes, but you need to make sure you've got the right environmental permits to be able to do that.
Thank you, Thomas. And then next question, do you know if heat from pyrolysis plant would be eligible under boiler replacement scheme?
So it would, providing the original boiler was pyrolysis. So when we talk technology, that falls with essentially under biogas, generally under biogas combustion. So you've got gasification, you've got AD plant, and you've got pyrolysis, which are the three things that are making the gas. You have to list the technology that you use to make the gas, and so if the application in the first place was for pyrolysis, then absolutely you could replace it with pyrolysis. But if it's come from a gas, or you're trying to get a gasifier onto a pyrolysis, then it's different technologies, and so therefore it's outside of the technology window. So it's all about making sure that the fuel or what generates that is the same, and that's within the technology window.
Okay, thank you. So I have another question come in. So will we need to replace a pair according to the UK distributor and manufacturer? There is no expiry or recalibration date or time. The meters being replaced will simply become landfill or be crushed, so not very sustainable.
Yes, again, this is stuff that we've taken to the government, sort of raising that as a concern of ours. Absolutely, the manufacturers are more than happy that these meters work perfectly. There's no 10-year. This is the 10-year requirement has come directly from the regulations, but ultimately, yes, that is part of the legislation for the RHI, so you're going to have to do it. And so we appreciate that you're creating landfill. Clearly, where you can recalibrate, then we're in a better position, but that does mean that potentially we've got about 6 weeks, if not longer, for your meter to be out of the system. So if you're running heat through that time frame, then you're not claiming your RHI. So yeah, it's something that we've raised through the REA again to challenge government, but we're sort of waiting for any response really. But I suspect there is not going to be anything. It's going to be that this 10-year requirement was written into law, and so everyone's going to have to comply with it.
Thank you, Thomas. And another question. So can a steam-based biomass CHP be replaced with an ORC CHP and remain eligible under the RHI?
Yes. The answer is yes. I mean, again, this then falls under the biomass CHP. So biomass CHP is one category on its own. Doesn't specify how you've generated that heat. So if you were to go from a steam to an ORC to any other technologies that biomass CHP, then that's perfectly fine to do. yeah, biomass CHP is sort of covers all of those technologies, whereas, as mentioned before, your pyrolysis and your gasification, there are specific they are specific within your application, so you wouldn't be able to sort of move with that. But yeah, biomass CHP, by all means, you can change it from a steam to an ORC, hot water ORC, and it's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Yeah, another question. So they've recently had their meter at 10 years. So recently replaced meter at 10 years, but don't know how they communicate the new meter to Ofgem. Are you able to advise on that?
Yeah, so I mean, again, clearly that's a service that we offer to help, but ultimately sending an email to rhi.accreditations will tell you, or rhi.notification, they're at ofgem.gov.uk, or you actually say to actually do the amendment. Once you're doing it, it's within your RHI application. So if you log into your system, you go to your accreditation, you press edit, you then go through the steps of changing your heat metering grid to say that you've replaced your heat meter. So it's all done within there. But to start, to get the advice on how to do it, I'd advise you sending an email to the RHI team, and they'll be able to pick that up. Otherwise, say pick up the phone to us, and we'll be able to help you with doing that.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. I think that's it for all the questions. However, like I said, if you do have any further questions that you can think of, feel free to drop us an email and we'll forward them to the relevant experts. I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for joining, and yes, we'll hopefully see you again soon on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.